The big story this week in the realm of gaming is, of course, NVIDIA's DLSS 5 technology. Now, past DLSS entries focused more on upscaling and providing better performance for low-spec PCs while still providing high visual fidelity with few compromises, and that was something that people saw as really beneficial. But then with the showcase of DLSS 5, the way people are perceiving this is that it basically feels like they're adding an AI filter on top due to the fact that the look that DLSS 5 gives to a game like Resident Evil 9 Requiem is that of a lot of the AI images and videos that you see. They just have this very specific, waxy look to them. And it feels like all the games that they showcase in this presentation all kind of give the characters that very similar homogenized kind of AI look to them that many feel as though it ultimately compromises the artistic integrity of what products and what games are being touched up with this technology. And here's the thing, by NVIDIA's own admission in their blog post here that kind of provides details about what DLSS 5 is, they full on admit that they do in fact blend handcrafted rendering with generative AI. While past iterations of DLSS utilized machine learning in order to do what it does, this new entry of DLSS does utilize generative AI. And for a lot of people, that's not entirely shocking because when you look at these comparison images and you look at the DLSS 5 on versions of the screenshots, it does have that generative AI kind of aesthetic and look to it that is not necessarily something that people find attractive and particularly cohesive for the games that are being implemented with this. It's that sense of uncanny valley, and I think somebody put it really aptly. What it reminds me of is those Harry Potter Balenciaga videos. I don't know if you're aware of that at all, but Andy Cortez here actually highlighted that, and I'm like, yes, that's exactly what it reminds me of. It's that level of uncanniness that people are seeing in what they've shown of DLSS 5 so far. And so yeah, the mockery that NVIDIA and DLSS 5 has been receiving online has been pretty vicious, with tons of people making fun of this technology with images like these and these, so on and so forth. This has kind of been the state of social media and gaming discussions on those platforms. And many people are highlighting games like Death Stranding 2, whose visual fidelity is absolutely insane and achieves a level of photorealism without the utilization of DLSS 5. And I would agree that when you look at this image of Norman Reedus versus this image of Grace Ashcroft, the left looks better, and it does not utilize DLSS technology. So I don't know what kind of black magic Kojima pulled, but I mean, the visual fidelity here is insane, and it doesn't have that uncanniness that DLSS 5 does. And so that's something that a lot of people have been praising, including things like the animations and how not only do the stills look photorealistic, but the animations are so good and match the level of photorealism so much that, people are like, this is wild that Kojima managed to accomplish what he did on a visual fidelity level with Death Stranding 2. Now, in today's video, I want to focus on the various responses and comments that we've seen from multiple sides of the games industry, including NVIDIA itself. CEO Jensen Huang was recently asked about the backlash, and he had something to say about that. And I also want to discuss the developers who've kind of spoken out and given their opinions on this whole matter. Now, funny enough, while we're talking about Death Stranding 2 and what it managed to accomplish graphically without DLSS 5, Kojima in essence chimed in by retweeting this post right here from Nick Tech that reads as follows: Death Stranding 2 already proved that you don't need generative AI to make extremely realistic faces in video games. This running smoothly on a PS5 console is showing how much progress game graphics have made over the years. Most importantly, this doesn't look uncanny. The fact that Kojima is retweeting this, I think, is a statement in of itself. But I think most people will be really interested to know what Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, had to say. And this headline kind of already highlights where this is going. He straight up said that gamers are completely wrong about DLSS 5. But somebody actually posted a video of Jensen Huang directly responding to all of the backlash surrounding DLSS 5. So I'd like to begin by showing you that first. So here's what Jensen Huang had to say.
Well, first of all, they're completely wrong. The reason for that is because, as I explained very carefully, DLSS 5 fuses controllability of geometry and textures and everything about the game with generative AI. Now, you could still fine-tune the generative AI so that you could make it your artistic style. And so all of that is up to you. We created the technology, we don't create the art. So DLSS 5, because it's geometry controlled, it's conditioned by the graph truth of the game. It enhances and adds generative capability to it, but it doesn't change the artistic control. It's not post-processing. It's not post-processing at the frame level. It's generative controlled at the geometry level. Okay, and so everything about that, the generative part of it, the game developer can fine tune. We demonstrated the technology and see what it can do. If you decide you want it to be, cartoon or toon shader or, made of glass it's up to you. All of that it's in the direct control of the game developer. This is very different than generative AI. It's content control generative AI.
But it's still a form of generative AI. Like, I understand that, it's a bit more fixed because of that requirement when it comes to using generative AI with video game creation, but it's still ultimately generative AI, and it really does show in the aesthetic of it all. But let's break down this entire statement. Starting with the opening statement, well, first of all, they're completely wrong, directly responding to a reporter who was essentially concerned about how DLSS 5 might have the potential to make games look worse or homogeneous, that all of them will have that same Gen AI look. To that, he said, everyone's completely wrong about that notion, and also about the technical aspects of DLSS 5 and how it's not just like a filter. The technology doesn't interpret a frame and then add things on top of it, but rather he says that DLSS 5 fuses controllability of the geometry and textures and everything about the game with generative AI. Further adding to that, he says that it's not post-processing at the frame level, it's generative control at the geometry level. And here's the thing, we can talk all about how the technology actually works, and I'm well aware that it's more complicated than just it's a filter. But the fact that the end result comes off as this just looks like a Gen AI slop filter tells you that the way you presented DLSS 5 as a technology was woefully misguided. And the fact that you thought that this kind of visual aesthetic would be received with, a round of applause and a standing ovation goes to highlight a certain level of tone deafness. And if there is a better way to utilize DLSS 5 technology where it more preserves the aesthetic of the game and doesn't homogenize everything with that waxy Gen AI look, then this announcement and showcase did an incredibly poor job at that. Jensen Huang comes out here acting like he's smarter than everyone, saying that I explained this very carefully, insinuating that the audience is stupid and aren't hearing his words. Listen to how he says this.
The reason for that is because, as I explained very carefully,
the insinuation there is people didn't listen to what I said and what I presented and what I showcased, but at the end of the day, the end result is what matters. People will look at what DLSS 5 can do based on, the DLSS on versus off comparison that you did, and the sheer amount of backlash that's been getting. All that highlights is that what's been shown of the technology so far is not something that people find particularly favorable, and that's something you have to accept. Now, Jensen Huang insists that developers can fine-tune the generative AI, that it doesn't change the artistic control, that developers will have control over how the generative AI will visually influence the aesthetics of a game. He highlights right here that you can do toon shaders and you can make everything look like it's made of glass. So there's a lot of tuning that Jensen Huang advertises game developers can do to ensure that this technology serves the aesthetic of each developer's games. Now, whether that's true or not, it's hard to say until we actually see it with our own eyes. All we know is that based on the announcement and everything that's been marketed about DLSS 5, every single game that showcased its upgraded graphics through DLSS 5, all of them ultimately did look homogenized. All of them had that exact same Gen AI waxy look. and it felt like all of these games lost their distinction and their individuality and their artistic style. When you look at DLSS 5 on for all of these games like Resident Evil 9 Requiem, and you look at Starfield here, right? It all kind of looks like they're all from the same game, like they were all made by the same engine and the same artist. That's the homogenification that I'm talking about that has got people riled up. I will admit that there are aspects of DLSS 5 that are impressive in the way that it does actually make better lighting for environments and stuff like that. I think a lot of the backdrops and environmental details and lighting stuff, that's where I think this looks less uncanny. But where DLSS 5, I think, really failed to showcase something that people find visually appealing is in the way DLSS 5 influences character models. Like looking at the DLSS on version of Hogwarts Legacy here, it's basically got the exact same look as this Starfield DLSS on screenshot here, or this one right here. It's got the exact same look as the Resident Evil DLSS on screenshot right here. They all look like they're part of the same thing rather than like distinct video games with distinct styles. People are calling it the yassification of character models for a reason. It feels like those characters just kind of lose their identity a little bit and they all get homogenized under the same filter-looking visual aesthetic that seems to be aimed at like almost like editing them to make them look more attractive rather than just sprucing up the existing kind of visual aesthetic and the original artistic intent and whatnot. Look, I'm open to the idea that developers will have a lot more control over DLSS 5 and how it visually affects their games than what the marketing showcased, but all the public has to go on is what the marketing showcased. So Jensen Huang can come out here and wag his fingers and talk about how carefully he explained things all he wants. But the thing is, like, the end results speak for themselves, and the end results we've been shown so far don't do a good job of convincing us that there will be a ton of visual variety with the implementation of DLSS 5 and that the identity of games' visual aesthetic can be retained. Though, of course, I'm super down for NVIDIA to showcase more of DLSS 5, more footage that highlights those claims and actually brings truth to them and convinces us that these claims are true in the final output. But until we see that, we can only believe what we're shown. And so in that area, that's all on NVIDIA for showcasing what they did and for shooting themselves on the foot on the marketing front and making it harder for people to believe that DLSS 5 will not homogenize all of the visual aesthetics of all the games. So yeah, show us more, NVIDIA. Instead of talking about the tech, show us what it's capable of, because that's really the only way people will be convinced, especially at this juncture when what we were shown in the big announcement was all homogenized looking waxy Gen AI visuals. But yeah, the backlash and the negative optics surrounding all of this got so bad for NVIDIA that they actually took to their YouTube video announcing DLSS 5 to pin a comment that states the following: important to note, with this technology advance, game developers have full detailed artistic control over DLSS 5's effects to ensure they maintain their game's unique aesthetic. The SDK includes things like intensity, color grading, and masking off places where the effect shouldn't be applied. It's not a filter. DLSS 5 inputs the game's color and motion vectors for each frame into the model, anchoring the output in the source 3D content. So they're emphasizing that it's not an overlay over the frames that are shown, but all of this Gen AI stuff is happening within the game itself. DLSS 5 is impacting the in-game assets directly, is what they're trying to emphasize. And that's all well and good, but again, all people ultimately care about are the end results. And the end results just are not visually or aesthetically pleasing. There's an uncanniness that makes people uncomfortable looking at this stuff. I mean, the backlash is near universal here. Looking at the likes to dislikes ratio here, only 15,000 likes versus almost 80,000 dislikes. Now let's move on by looking at what developers have had to say about DLSS 5. You've got folks who are kind of all about DLSS 5 and what it's striving for, and then you've got also developers who have spoken out against DLSS 5, so I'd like to take a look at both ends of the spectrum. Now, among the people really gassing up DLSS 5 is lead producer of Epic Games, JP Kellums, who tweeted the following: all you guys roasting DLSS 5 like it doesn't look better, is detracting from art direction, are absolutely insane. The lighting and shading improvements are bonkers. If that was shown as a next-gen hardware reveal and not AI, you guys would be going nuts like the Watch Dogs demo. I think that is a rather bold statement. Something looking incredibly photorealistic doesn't automatically make it look good. And I'm sorry, JP Kellums, you can say whatever you want, but the general masses, the overwhelming argument is that DLSS 5, from what's been shown so far, does detract from art direction. JP Kellums claims that it's just the fact that AI is attached to DLSS 5 is what's blinding people and making them kind of biased towards hating on it. But the main argument isn't that it's AI, because DLSS prior to DLSS 5 also used AI and people were okay with that. The argument is that the end result is just not good. And that's been a consistent pattern with Gen AI. Like, yeah, it's getting better and better, but a lot of it also just looks like the same homogenized slop. And so that's where AI comes into the conversation. But generally, the argument people are making is that it doesn't look visually pleasing. The technology is impressive. What it does is insane. But in terms of what it ultimately makes us feel is a sense of like, something's off about that. Which is why one of the top comments responding to JP Kellums reads, I assure you, if next-gen hardware showcased the comically over-the-top doll-faced Instagram filter, it will be as ruthlessly mocked as it is right now. You cannot look at Grace's face and tell me it is a bonkers improvement with a straight face. Also responding to JP Kellums is an actual developer and artist, Carla Ortiz, who has worked on a number of prominent films and TV, whether it's MCU, HBO, video games, you name it. Carla Ortiz came out saying, but it objectively looks terrible, ? Please take it from an artist. All of it being so detailed kills the balance of the image, making cinematic games lit terribly, bringing too much noise that kills focal points of the image, and turns interesting characters into yassified same old. I think often there's this tendency to underestimate just how specific art actually is. A lot of the conscious choices that artists make in making sure things are lighted exactly a certain way, things are framed exactly a certain way to pull your eyes in a very specific direction. It's not just about more graphics, more details. It's about how those tools are utilized to make everything the most balanced, visual, cohesive thing possible. Artists are very conscious about the specificity of their work, and DLSS 5, the specific form that we've seen it in so far, takes that specificity and kind of throws it out the window. JP Kellums also tried to highlight this Twitter article from Ryan Trout that tries to explain DLSS 5 and talks about how it's not a face filter, but stuff that happens in real time to the in-game assets and whatnot. Again, all very impressive in its capabilities, but end result-wise, people are just straight up saying that it doesn't really look good in their eyes. Genki here, who is in video game news and whatnot, came out and said people's eyes are naturally drawn to the face first, so it's kind of hard to ignore it. Faces look very bad, in my opinion, with Genki highlighting how Grace all of a sudden is wearing all this makeup that wasn't there originally, and JP Kellums tries to insist that she's wearing makeup in the original as well, but not to the degree that the DLSS 5 on version does. Most people agree that Grace's appearance does look quite different from what they played in the original game with DLSS 5 on. JP Kellums says that it's about the lighting, how it doesn't let you see the makeup clearly. I'm sorry, but did we play the same game? And Genki, in response to JP Kellums, put it best here, from a solely technical aspect, it does look impressive. And yeah, I mean, it is, again, from a technological perspective, an impressive feat. But with all that said, as Genki puts it here, I can't get beyond how it removes an aspect of the original art design. She looks all glammed up as she's going to visit the place her mother was brutally murdered. An aspect of the original artistic intent is lost, in my opinion. And this argument goes on, but, that's kind of where the technology people versus the art people differ in their opinions. The technology people care about that the technology is impressive and what it outputs is dramatic. The artistic people are looking at it and going, okay, but does this actually make sense for what makes good art, which is not just about more lighting and more pixels and more pores on characters and more details. It's about just overall visual cohesion, and that's something that the technical people don't really seem to grasp. Now let's take a look at that Ryan Trout article that JP Kellums spotlighted. Ryan Trout is president and GM at Signal 65, formerly graphics and AI product at Intel, and then former owner at PC Perspective. Once again, a very technology-minded perspective rather than a very artist-minded perspective. But he does highlight a lot of interesting features about this, and he does provide some insight into the technology itself. He does say this excerpt that I thought was worth looking at. The AI model powering DLSS 5 is a single unified model, same model for every game. It's not trained per title, per face, or per object type. It takes the raw color, buffer, and motion vectors as input, analyzes the scene semantics from that single frame, and enhances the lighting and material response while staying anchored to the original 3D content. But he does make the point of like all this is a single unified model, and that explains why all of the examples that have been shown so far of DLSS 5 of taking graphics and making them look more realistic, all of it ends up looking homogenized, like it did come from a single model. All of it looks like almost like it was made in the same engine by the same artists and by the same people, where, again, these games suddenly start blending together in their visual aesthetic instead of having that individuality that is so key to art. He continues, it recognizes the difference between skin and metal and water and stone and foliage, and it processes each of those materials differently based on how light should interact with them. Again, all very impressive, but end results-wise, people are not particularly enthused. He then insists that that's not a filter, that's fundamentally a different approach to how the final image gets assembled, and it's deterministic and consistent from frame to frame, which is a hard requirement for games. And yes, when you look at how DLSS 5 technically works, you cannot necessarily call it like an Instagram filter, but it still does come across that way. And so what does that tell you? That means the technology, or at least the output of it, or what you showcase in terms of what DLSS 5 can output, has to be tweaked, and you have to show us more to prove to us that it's not just a glorified filter. Now, in terms of the amount of control that developers get to have over DLSS 5, he says that if DLSS 5 were a black box that slapped a one-size-fits-all enhancement over every game, the artistic intent concerns would be completely valid, but that's not what this is. Developers don't just get an on and off switch, they get intensity controls that can be dialed anywhere, not just full strength. They get spatial masking so they can set the water enhancements to 100%, wood to 30%, characters to 120%, all independently within the same scene. Okay, so there are dials for those individual components, but it feels like all of those dials ultimately lead to the same kind of visual aesthetic. At least that's the impression that the current marketing and the current showcase of DLSS 5 has given thus far. And then Ryan talks about how Bethesda, Capcom, Ubisoft, Tencent, Warner Brothers Games, and others have signed on to utilize DLSS 5 or experiment with it. And he said this, when developers previewed the technology, their technical artists were apparently co-advocating for it internally because it gets them closer to what they actually intended their characters and environments to look like when they were designing them in their authoring tools. Then those assets get dropped into a real-time game engine with a finite performance budget, and compromises happen. DLSS 5 lets them claw back some of what gets lost in that transition. DLSS 5 isn't NVIDIA applying its stylistic choices on top of someone else's game. It's providing a tool that helps developers close the gap between what they can render in 16 milliseconds and what they actually want the players to see. That's a meaningful distinction, and it's a big reason why the developer response has been positive. I know NVIDIA's intent isn't to apply its stylistic choices on developers, but I think DLSS 5 as a technology, because of its origin as a Gen AI tech, ultimately has certain limitations when it comes to the ability to present hyper-realistic looking imagery without it having that waxy Gen AI look, because the technology, the model that it's running from, is all still a homogenized element. Ryan Shroud tries to prove his point by presenting these images of Assassin's Creed Shadows. Right here we have DLSS off, and this is DLSS on. But looking at the still frame, I've seen so many AI thumbnails on YouTube in recent months, and this looks like one of those exact thumbnails. It's got that same vibe, and this screenshot suddenly makes this game look exactly the same as all of the other games that were showcased in that NVIDIA trailer with DLSS on. It's got that same waxy, homogenized look, which is a term that I keep repeating, but I don't know how else to put it. It all kind of just looks the same. You know what I mean? It all gives off exactly the same vibes. All of it has the same uncanny photorealism to it, rather than photorealism that feels pleasing to the eyes. It's not that it isn't impressive that this technology can do this. There's just something kind of off-putting enough about this, and from an artistic perspective, it just feels like a lot gets lost. Something gets lost, at least. Hardware Unboxed here kind of framed the concerns surrounding this quote of how the AI model powering DLSS 5 is a single unified model, same model for every game. It's not trained per title, per face, or per object type. Like, sure, you can control individual dials here and there, but that's the same as being able to control the intensity of like an Instagram filter, but all of those filters ultimately come from like the same source. As Hardware Unboxed put it, so developers can choose the level of Instagram model filter they apply to faces, but what if the DLSS 5 unified model can only generate an Instagram face? NVIDIA needs to prove that the technology is capable of maintaining the style of a game, which their examples haven't done, hence the backlash. If they can prove that down the line, then great, 2 thumbs up. Right now, though, NVIDIA has completely failed on that front. They've actually done the complete opposite and thoroughly discredited notions and claims that the original art direction, that the original art style will be maintained and that the visuals will not be homogenized. Now, another developer who expressed their excitement for DLSS 5 is Todd Howard himself, and there's been plenty of backlash against Todd Howard due to him advertising DLSS 5 as, being incredibly transformative, only for the end result, looking at the Starfield DLSS 5 on screenshots, to be less than ideal for a lot of people who were just off-put by what was presented. Bethesda Game Studios did respond, seemingly seeing the backlash, responding to Digital Foundry's coverage of DLSS 5 and saying, appreciate your excitement and analysis of the new DLSS 5 lighting here. And then they try to do essentially some damage control, insisting that this is a very early look, and our teams will be further adjusting the lighting and final effect to look the way we think works best for each game. This will all be under our artist control and totally optional for players. I hope they're able to prove that, but the thing is, like, the announcement that they made with DLSS 5, they gave the okay and the go-ahead to showcase Starfield the way it was showcased by NVIDIA through the videos that were released. Kind of makes me go, did they have any input from artists who make them go, whoa, let's tune this a little more before we showcase DLSS 5 like this, because this looks wrong and off and weird, and I think a lot of people will be turned off by this. Did they not consult any artists to kind of make sure they made adjustments that would make the DLSS 5 technology actually, look good? Or is it that the technology has limitations when it comes to what it can aesthetically realize? It's hard to say right now. We hope it's not the latter. We hope this was just a case of just really bad marketing. All right, now let's look at developers who have expressed their disdain or disapproval or concerns surrounding DLSS 5, starting with Dave Oshry from New Blood, who said, this DLSS 5 AI dog shit is actually depressing, man. Even worse is that a whole generation has grown up who won't even know this looks bad or wrong because to them, it'll be normal. We need to push back harder against it. This is someone who is very established as a developer and someone who has a pretty good reputation overall with the games that he shipped. And so him coming out and giving this kind of statement is a pretty big deal, and he's not the only one. You've got Sluggerfly here, developers of the upcoming Super Meat Boy 3D, who poked fun at DLSS 5 by tweeting, guess every game dev has to do one of those now, joining in and doing our part, showing the DLSS off version that actually looks good and whose art style is maintained versus the hyper-realistic DLSS on that is all kinds of disturbing. You've got a prominent Baldur's Gate 3 developer coming out with tweets like this, playing some Resident Evil Requiem this morning. The game is great, but I just wish it infused pixels with photoreal lighting and materials, bridging the gap between rendering and reality. Alas, unplayable for now. Obviously, pure sarcasm and a pretty low-key but not so low-key dig at DLSS 5. And then a developer from Pow World chimed in with, it's such a shame, isn't it? Gameplay solid, but none of the characters have that 2020 Snapchat filter look that I'm looking for in a video game. And then the Baldur's Gate 3 dev sarcastically responded with, lazy devs. So yeah, while certain executives and people in high positions as developers are excited for this technology, the fact that there are also so many developers just trashing DLSS 5 from what's been showcased so far and are just so adamantly against it says a lot about how DLSS 5 has been perceived and how utterly it's botched either its marketing or the direction of the technology. Here we have another developer, Gus Select, saying, bad ending, now every game is AI slop. The list just goes on and on. David Szymanski here, the guy who made Iron Lung, Dusk, Scroll Stapler, so on and so forth, commented on someone arguing against this notion of like, well, you can turn off DLSS 5. It is optional. You don't have to use it. Many a true nerd in regards to that argument responded with, okay, sure. Can I also turn off the massively inflated prices of PC parts caused by NVIDIA fucking up the market as part of its huge AI push that's closely tied to DLSS 5's AI models? Oh, so I can't just ignore it then. That's another aspect of DLSS 5 that has baggage behind it, is that it's a very AI-focused technology, and AI right now is under a lot of scrutiny because of the way it's kind of fucked up the electronics and computing parts market to such a high degree that prices for things like RAM and SSDs and GPUs and whatnot have tripled, quadrupled, and completely fucked over consumers. And the fact that with all the trouble that AI has caused, the end result of DLSS 5, a very AI-heavy technology, is what we have been showcased, which just doesn't look very good. It only pisses people off that much more. It basically makes them go, all of this bullshit we've had to deal with thanks to AI, all of that for a technology like DLSS 5, whose output is not something that people are all that enthused by. And to that, David Szymanski responded with, additionally, upscaling, TAA, frame generation, and ray tracing are increasingly not optional because games are designed around them. Now, with DLSS 5 in particular, it's worth noting that currently it's only available for 50 series RTX graphics cards and beyond. So for now, it's not going to be universal enough that it's going to be what games are developed around. It's going to be a very niche technology, but that could change years down the line. And if the over-reliance on Gen AI, as well as upscaling TAA and frame generation and ray tracing and all these things becomes commonplace, then games being designed around them might mean that AI is no longer an optional part of gaming, but an integral part of game development and the output that we get on a visual level. Next up, we have Jeff Talbot, who is also a game developer, a senior concept artist at Gunfire Games, who posted the following on Blue Sky, saying this is not the direction games should be going in. In every shot, the art direction was taken away for the senseless addition of details. Each DLSS 5 shot looked worse and had less character than the original. This is just a garbage AI filter. Let's not do this shit. The fact that developers are basically calling DLSS 5 of an AI filter, even though technically it's not really a filter. Like, I get that the technology, the way it works, is not really fitting the definition of filter, but the fact that it gives off continuously the impression of AI filter, again, that tells you everything. And so yeah, there are tons of articles covering all of the ways in which developers have spoken out against DLSS 5. Here's a Video Game Chronicles article. Talks about another developer who spoke out, Steve Karolowicz, a rendering engineer at Respawn, who wrote, DLSS 5 looks like an overbearing contrast sharpness and airbrush filter, remarkably different frames with the rationale of photoreal lighting. Nah, I think I'll stick with the original artistic intent. Here's a PC Gamer article that also lists all of the various commentary we've seen from developers who do not like DLSS 5, like full on. So yeah, this is kind of the current state of the discourse surrounding DLSS 5. There is some division. There are some folks who are all in favor of the potential of DLSS 5, but because what DLSS 5 has shown so far has been far from ideal, despite all of their various claims about what this technology can do and what it can enable developers to do, ultimately the dissent against DLSS 5, the backlash against it, is definitely far greater than any of the compliments and praise we might be seeing surrounding this technology that maybe down the line, with the right usage, with the right tweaks, or with the right presentation, we'll be able to win people over when its capabilities are better than just turning every game into Gen AI slop-looking imagery. And until examples are shown where that doesn't happen, what else are we supposed to believe? What else are we supposed to, surmise about this technology? And if all of this is somehow a false narrative, then that's NVIDIA's fault for their piss-poor marketing of this technology. Or maybe there's some truth behind people's complaints about this technology and its limitations, but I suppose only time will tell because this is all ultimately still developing. DLSS 5 is still in development, and, who knows what the future holds when it comes to this kind of tech. But for now, this is where we're at. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on all of the commentary surrounding DLSS 5, from the people who support DLSS 5 to all of the dissenters against DLSS 5 to NVIDIA's own response to all of the various things that developers have been saying and what tech enthusiasts have been saying. What's your take on all of that commentary, and what's your take on DLSS 5? Share them in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.